So welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And this week I wanted to do a bit of a continuation of what we did last week. Last week we talked about mental tennis and that as a particular thought pattern in ME chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. So I thought this week we take another one of the patterns which I mentioned briefly last week, which is the pattern of Windows ME. And what Windows ME really is it's like an operating system for our brain and in many ways our nervous system, where we're constantly checking our body and checking our symptoms. It's like there's a few questions that incessantly are running in the background. The questions like, what's wrong with me? Why is it wrong with me? How long will it be wrong with me for? Will I ever recover? Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? Should I rest? Should I not rest? And in a sense, everything becomes filtered through that series and set of questions. And the reason why we called it Windows ME is it's literally like, if you think about Windows computer operating system, it's literally like an operating system for our brain through which everything gets processed. And it kind of around the time we came up with this was in the early 2000s. And around then, a lot of people were using the actual Windows system, Windows ME. And the funny thing about Windows ME was it used to crash all the time, the computer system, mainly because it couldn't run multiple programs very well at once. And we always thought that was quite a comic reflection, in a sense, of the version of Windows ME that often we're talking about. And so, in a sense, by processing everything through this, it has an ongoing significant impact in our nervous system. Because if you think about it, it's like, let's say, for example, we get invited to a friend's wedding. If we're not running Windows ME and we also don't have ME chronic fatigue fibromyalgia, we get invited to a wedding and it's basically, do I want to go, yes or no? And if it's a friend we care about, we want to go. It's like, can I make it in my diary? What am I going to wear? And we're looking forward to going to that wedding. If we're looking at it from an ME chronic fatigue lens, what tends to happen is it's much more, will I have the energy? Will I get the food that I need? Will it cause me to crash? What if I let people down? There's a whole set of processes that go on. Now, it's not that those thoughts are not always appropriate. Sometimes we need to ask certain questions about whether we have the energy to be doing something or not, and whether it's going to cause a crash or whatever. But it's more the fact that everything in our life starts to get filtered through these questions. So another example is we're watching something on TV and someone in, let's say, a TV show travels off to Australia. And we think, I'd love to go to Australia. And then we go, but what if I couldn't make the journey? And will I ever recover? And will I ever get to go to Australia? Or ever go to Australia again? And all these little things that are happening day to day in our lives start to get filtered through the lens of our symptoms and the condition that we're in. And what that does is it sends a constant message to our nervous system of stress, of maladaptive stress response. It's like a constant message of danger. And that constant message of danger means that our system is constantly holding on and tight and reacting to that, which puts us in the exact opposite state to what we need to be in for our body to be able to heal. So turning off maladaptive stress response, and specifically that's something maybe we'll do other videos. I'm sure we've done stuff in the past, we certainly have on our YouTube channel, we do more in the future. But that impact of Windows ME is significant. But also the impact of Windows ME is it's very hard to enjoy life when we're filtering everything in that way. So this also raises the question of why do we do it? Why do we do Windows ME? So the reason behind that is often we haven't listened to our body for many years. In fact, that's the part of the reason why we've got sick in the first place. That we've, for years, ignored communications from our body and our emotions and everything else. And so our body, and our unconscious, has learned basically not to trust us. And it's learned to ramp up this response, this constant checking of what's wrong, why is it wrong, should I rest, should I not rest, can I do it, can I not do it, as a form of self-preservation, as a form of protection. And often in the early time of being ill, it's actually crucial that we start to run this pattern, because it's what stops us booming and busting. It's what stops us pushing ourselves, and it's what stops us doing activities we shouldn't be. Because whereas before there were no checks, in a sense the pendulum swings so far the other way that there's almost too many checks. But those checks are needed to be able to make sure that we get our attention. The trouble is that after a while, Windows ME gets a whole life of its own. And whereas perhaps at stage one, it's useful a certain amount to get us to stop and to rest and to listen to our body, it starts to become its own set of problems. And it starts to have such an impact in driving up our nervous system and feeding maladaptive stress response that we're not actually responding based upon what we can do or what we can't do, or whether we should be resting or not resting. Everything's getting filtered through this jumble, which often is also ending up in mental tennis and all the other things that we can talk about as mental patterns. And so it starts off to help us, but it then becomes a problem in of itself. How we deal with Windows ME is a whole thing in itself, and more my purpose of this video was to kind of draw attention towards it. But in terms of what we do about it, one of the most important things is the phrase that I use often: if you can see it, you don't have to be it. And the more awareness we have that the pattern is happening, the more we can catch ourselves. Sometimes we're catching ourselves initially in hindsight, like we can see afterwards, oh my God, I was running all this Windows ME. But with practice, we can catch ourselves at the time that it's happening. And the more awareness we have of the Windows ME pattern that's going on, of course, the more we can then do something to stop the pattern. If you are a patient of the psychology team at the clinic, then the stop process and a lot of things we use on the psychology side can be extremely helpful and useful to work with it. Things that calm the nervous system, if appropriate, like meditation and yoga, can be helpful to settle it. And one of the interesting things is there's nothing more calming to the Windows ME process than seeing real recovery. So ironically, what happens is the better we get, and not really ironically, but thankfully, the better we get, in a sense, the pattern self-corrects itself anyway, because there's less triggers that are feeding the pattern. But sometimes to make that progress, we need to break the pattern before that. So I think that's probably it for today. Feel free to share your experiences and comments around it. You know, some of the ways it plays out. It's often helpful to share with your, for yourself, but also with other people, to identify some of the patterns and the manifestations, because it helps bring more awareness to it. But I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to talking with you again this time next week. Thanks for watching.